Katie Zacharia is a dynamic political, media, business, and legal professional.
Fix California senior advisor.
A smart Republican strategist,
political analyst, and attorney.
Joined by Katie Zacharia.
Katie Zacharia.
Hey, Katie, nice to see you.
You're taking one of the bluest states and trying to turn it red.
You have to seize this moment. The call is really you have got to keep fighting for your state.
More people are waking up, especially in California.
Every generation has a responsibility, and I take that responsibility seriously.
And we need a leader who actually wants to meet our needs. President Trump has shown that he is one of the best political athletes of all time, the solution-driven president, and we are working on behalf of you.
You're a mom of four. You have stood up in a world that likes to sit down. I think we need more female, badass women like you on our side in our fight.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. And they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Garcia, so that's no excuse.
Katie Zacharia is a dynamic political, media, business, and legal professional with expertise across political strategy and advocacy, international corporate law, higher education, and nonprofit work, both in the U.S. and abroad. Currently, she serves as Senior Advisor and Chief Advancement Officer for Ambassador Richard Grenell's initiative, Fix California, which registers unregistered conservative voters throughout California. Katie is also a regular contributor on Fox News, Newsmax, Real America's Voice, and One America News. But perhaps her best appearance yet is today on We the People. Katie, we are so glad you joined us.
So glad to be here from the great state of California.
Well, and all the way over here on the other coast in Florida, we've got a lot of work to do from your coast to mine and everywhere in between. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. I love the perspective that you bring as a conservative from California, because although it's blue, broadly, you are making a real impact in red pockets throughout the state and a real model for someone that people all over the country can emulate. And your work goes well beyond California, and we're going to get into some of that today. So let's just kind of start there. You know, you've been very instrumental in helping conservatives make real progress at the state level. You've worked on issues, as I said in the intro, ranging from regulatory reform, flipping districts, school choice. Tell us about Fix California. But as you do that, you know, you're taking one of the bluest states and trying to turn it red. And I think that's a model that even in red states, which we're going to talk about, we may take for granted. So what does your work in California say about the Republican Party and just the conservative movement in general?
Well, I'll start with actually our work in California is based on registering unregistered conservatives. So what we started realizing is that conservatives were by and large not coming out and registering to vote. So we had this enormous disparity of registered voters versus unregistered voters. And what we did is we took actually a technology out of Florida. Ambassador Rick Grenell said, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. I'm going to go look at these other states like Florida and Ohio and see what they're doing well. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to use it in California. And so what Florida was doing well, other than having a great governor, great policies, and a lot of people flocking to the state from California, was in fact, it was finding unregistered conservatives. So that's all digitally. They're, you know, looking at the entire algorithm. Do they own a gun? Do they go to church? Do they drive a truck? This is public information, and they're cross-referencing that with the voter database. And if they're not in the voter database, then they digitally harass them until they go register to vote. And actually, this initiative in Florida is one of the key reasons why Florida is deep red. That was Governor DeSantis and then also Rick Scott. And so what we saw in California is in 2019, President Trump came out and fundraised for Fix California, and then also First Lady Melania Trump. And in 2020, and we did an initial dig and found 1.4 million. Just this is the initial dig, 1.4 million unregistered conservatives in California. These are conservatives that are not out casting their ballots. These are people that are really upset about what's happening in California, but are not participating in our elections because they think my vote doesn't matter. And so what we decided is we are going to daily raise money to get these voters registered. And so we brought it down from $15 a voter to $5 a voter, or between $5 and $6. And we're right now in the last year, we registered over 200,000 new conservatives in the state of California. Of our 1.4 million that we found, we've registered over 200,000, which is actually quite remarkable given the fact that it was a presidential last year and fundraising was quite difficult.
I had Elizabeth Barkohana on the show, who you know, and she does similar type of work. And we were talking about how, the registration of voters is sort of the vote before the vote. If other people are sort of closeted and don't realize that there's other people like them out there, they're not as motivated to show up to the polls. It also goes to the people running for office. If they look at voter registration and they say, well, there's no chance I'm going to win an election in a blue state anyways, why should I even run? However, before voting occurs, voter registration occurs. So if we can sort of bring the tide to the shore there, we can have real momentum going into elections. We can get
Yes.
more people to show up to vote, and we can get better candidates. Now, I want to talk about what states like Florida can learn from this. I mean, Floridians, I think some Floridians take for granted what we have here, but California was once red, and we were a whisker away from Andrew Gillum beating Ron DeSantis and not looking like the Florida that we are today. I know I have listeners and viewers of this show in Texas, another very red state, but we cannot take these things for granted. So walk us through. I want to come out of California for a minute. You did some very impactful work for the Trump administration in Dearborn, Michigan. I'd like you to sort of walk us through that case study, talk about the success you had there, and what lessons can we in Florida, Texas, and other red states, or even blue states with conservatives in them, learn from that?
Well, I think you start with Florida actually before Michigan. And the thing is that people get complacent. Republicans more than Democrats. And this is a call to myself. This is a call to the party in general. Democrats are relentless. They go, go, go. And they're going after Texas right now. And they'll go after Florida because they see that Republicans kind of recede back and enjoy a big win and they don't keep fighting. And so the call is really, you have got to keep fighting for your state, that you have to have the same drive that the Democrats have for every county. You do not want to give up counties. You don't want to say, oh, that county is blue, we'll let it go to the Democrats. No, you fight. You register the voters, you get ground game going, you get a good candidate in, and you have hopefully voter ID like we need in California, and you push. And so what happened with Dearborn, Michigan was amazing. And in fact, it speaks really to President Trump's policies more than anything, is that Dearborn, Michigan is the most Arab American majority county in the nation. And what happened is really that Kamala Harris's policies through Joe Biden showed Arab Americans that there is not really a path towards peace, that there is not really even a path towards a ceasefire. And they didn't trust that either Joe Biden or Kamala Harris could deliver in peace in the Middle East like President Trump had already done with the Abraham Accords. And they knew that President Trump, though they may not like some of his policies, they knew that President Trump would be someone that would command respect and would be able to bring peace and make deals and restore peace to the region. And so they also are a very family-oriented people group. And as it pertained to policies in Michigan, they want to be able to send their kid to a school without transgenderism. They want to have protections as parents and choices on where they can send their kids to school. These are not that dynamic. These are basic. But what President Trump continues to say is we are now the party of common sense. So what we did with Michigan is we really hit on the points that were important to them: freedom of religion, freedom to raise your kids how you want to raise your kids, protection for the parents, opportunity to choose where they want to go to school. These are things that resonate with the Arab American community, and very much so not with Kamala and not with Joe Biden. And so it was pretty low-hanging fruit. But what it is coalition building. And it was an 18-month drive, and Ambassador Rick Grenell was at the forefront of that with Dr. Massad Boulos, who's Lebanese. And they really, Daryl Issa, they really pushed these initiatives forward to bring a community together, to realize that President Trump is going to be the candidate that brings you what you are already looking for. And Kamala had not delivered, and Joe had not delivered. So the juxtaposition from President Trump's first term to Biden's second term with Kamala as the VP, it was such an easy win if you just communicate directly the policy issues and not the media jargon that they were so used to hearing, right?
Yeah, so you said there's a lot to unpack there. We're going to get into storytelling and messaging because I think that played a
Right.
key role in Dearborn, Michigan, and all your work. But you mentioned something else, and it's something that I've been saying a lot. The conservative movement tends to sort of win and then dance in the end zone. We sort of treat our victories as if the clock ran out and the game's over, when in a lot of cases, we're just in the first inning. I've had Jen Say and Riley Gaines on this show, and they've talked about how regardless of all despite all the wins that they've had in the transgender movement and girls competing with boys, we're just in the beginning and the fight has to go on. So in your issues, you win in Dearborn, you have success in California. What do you then do? Like, what's the next step? So if someone at home is working on an issue at the local level there and they get a victory, how do you step on the gas from that point forward? I'm sure every issue is different, but in your world, what does that look like? You don't just flip Dearborn and walk away.
Right. I mean, what it is I think conservatives have said California's out to lunch, the state is awash, we're not going to fight for it anymore. When really you have to take the battle to the Democrats. And we've seen this with what President Trump is doing with CBS and the 60 Minutes interview and the law firms that became weaponized and politicized and went against him. He's finally taking it and making them go on the offense. Letitia James and mortgage fraud. And this is a model that Republicans have got to start getting used to. You want to bring the issue and make the Democrats get on the defense, and we need to play in the offense. And so what's happening in California is the policies have so clearly failed, right? The fires, $250 billion in damages, $250 billion, and homes lost because a reservoir was empty, fire hydrants were empty. This is not controversial. These policies are not controversial. They were cutting the fire budget. There were so many missteps, and it was all under Democrat leadership. Gavin Newsom, Karen Bass. And so you have to seize this moment, right? We don't want to continue saying, oh, California's lost. You seize that inflection point that we are ripe for change. And now is the time to invest, and not necessarily even in a candidate. You have to invest in the unsexy, unfun work of voter registration, which takes money. And especially if you're doing digitally, all it takes is money to invest in these firms to digitally register these voters. And then also you have to get used to wanting to get behind initiatives like we have Assemblyman Carl DeMaio is running a voter ID initiative in California. Proof of citizenship. Very basic. Again, people don't get very excited about these types of things, but it is the only way you win. And the Democrats understood that, right? You have Mark Elias right now going after a voter ID bill in Wyoming. Okay. What he's doing is he's saying, we're going to say that it's illegal for this state to ask for voter ID. So he's putting the Republicans back on the defense and he's going on the offense. We're going to make them fight for voter ID nationwide. We have to do the reverse, but we don't. We do not do this. I mean, you've done it in Florida, but that's after massive wins and then you have enough support. That has to be the bare bones baseline for Republicans and I'll just say it in simple terms. Republicans have to go after the unsexy, unfun issues. Voter ID, voter registration.
You talk about seizing the moment, seizing the issues, and that's what they did in your state. California was once red, now it's blue. I hear with couple themes one theme that you just mentioned that comes up a lot on this show is local, local, local. You can have the most impact at your local level, both from a personal standpoint and from a policy standpoint. But you mentioned something else. You said something about the left being ruthless, and I hear that a lot. And I come from a nonprofit background where the left is just so much craftier than the right when it comes to philanthropic work, and they've got their fingernails so dirty in that work that we don't have enough time on the show for that. But maybe in your world, or just in a world that's more relatable to a broader audience, what is the left doing? It doesn't have to be a specific example, but maybe from a grand strategy sample, what is the left doing that's so much better than us? And is there anything from their playbook that we can copy and sort of turn the table on them?
Man, that's a hard question right now because I'm looking at what the left is doing and they have no policies. They're defending criminal illegals, right? And going after an El Salvadorian citizen and calling him a Maryland man, right? And who is a wife beater and a human smuggler, right? So the Democrats are great at evoking emotion and bringing out a victim or creating a victim for people to get behind, even if it's a blatant lie. And I bring up Abrego Garcia because he is not a Maryland man, right? He is an El Salvadorian illegal immigrant. But they are somehow able to get people to buy into the fact that this poor Maryland dad got removed from his family, and you too can be accidentally deported under Trump's policies. So the thing is that Republicans and conservatives do not like to be deceptive and lie straight the way that Democrats do. Democrats don't have a problem with just saying, okay, this guy, he might be illegal, but we're gonna couch it in these very fancy terms. And I'm not calling for Republicans to blatantly lie, but Republicans have got to start evoking emotion. And I think President Trump and the Trump team, especially round 2 that we've seen, they brought Peyton McNabb, the young woman who was hit by a volleyball by a transgender male athlete and was knocked unconscious and had partial paralysis. They brought her to President Trump's joint address to Congress. And what it is here is a person who has suffered from the policies of Democrats. Here is someone who has actual physical wounds from a male athlete participating in female sports. And we're finally starting to bring out, Patty Morin spoke on behalf of her daughter who was killed, a mother of 5 who was killed by an illegal immigrant, violently raped and killed in a park. They brought Patty Morin to address a press conference for people to see that there is actually real human suffering through, like, the Laken Riley, right? Like, her family is deeply involved with the Trump administration, that the Democrat policies have failed. So Republicans have got to get better at messaging what they're doing and really evoking and provoking an emotional response from people. And I think we're moving in that direction, Gates, don't you? I think we're getting better at it.
I could not agree more. I think the importance of narrative in passing policy is paramount. I think it's something that Trump's good at. The Democrats have always gone after hearts, and the Republicans have always gone after minds. Now, obviously, the mind is what we act with, but the heart is what sort of engages people and gets people onto your side. And I think, like him or not, Donald Trump is a storyteller, and people relate to stories. All the examples you just gave, he brings people's stories into the mainstream and shares them with the greater country, so people can feel like these are relatable issues that they're going to face in their day-to-day lives. I mean, some of the things that we're dealing with now that are, polarizing our country, we've always dealt with, but the conservative movement has finally woken up to telling the American people that, hey, here's a real life example, and this could happen at your kid's school. This could happen at your workplace. And if we're going to win this culture war, we have to win hearts while we win the minds. So you hit the nail on the head there. So along the lines of storytelling, I think that we're doing a better job of reaching younger Americans, a younger demographic. There's certainly some statistics coming out, voter demographics, religious participation in our country, that conservatives are capturing a younger movement of individuals. We've got to keep this. We're doing a better job in the media with the new media, podcasts like this. We're doing a better job in the arts and entertainment space with Angel Studios, in film, Tuttle Twins in books, all of guests that we've had on this show. So along that line, what do you think we're doing right to capture and keep young Americans, and where do we still need to make progress?
Yeah, and also you have Charlie Kirk at Turning Point, who
Great point.
has really given young men and women, but I'm going to focus on the men for a second, young men permission again, and it's in line with President Trump as well, to be masculine. right? The left spent so much time demasculating men, feminizing men, making men feel weak and unimportant and unproductive in society. And Turning Point has revolutionized that and really turned it on its head, that it is, here is masculinity. They've defined masculinity, or really redefined it. And we're going to make it cool again. We're going to make it cool to go save the American flag that's being taken down and be hero, right? And President Trump has lived this out in his presidency: an assassination attempt, the judicial, the weaponization of the judicial system, and that it is, that to be a hero is cool, right? That I felt like the left for so long, and you see it even in like the Marvel movie with Iron Man. And I'm just going to go on a cultural detour here. They take Thor, right? Who is this? He's just, Chris Hemsworth is this great looking guy, super masculine, super muscular, and they make him into this character who's soft and overweight and goofy and silly. I can't remember which Captain America or Marvel, not Captain America, which Marvel movie ended up creating this. But they turn him into this weak, kind of pathetic person. And that's not on accident. I look at that situation and I'm like, they take the hero and they have to weaken him, because it's intimidating for the left to have these magnificent, benevolent, really good people, good heroes. And so to look at the culture war, I think we have to embrace the true form of masculinity, women, and also in femininity. So the left also went after what it is to be feminine. You look at let's just say the sacrament of the left is abortion, right? What is the crux of being truly feminine is, being pregnant, giving birth, raising children. Like the depth of femininity is really seen in that. And I think that what we're starting to look at is we're flipping all this on its head. It's great to be masculine again. It's great to be feminine again, to be home with your kids, to raise your kids, to homeschool your kids. And I think that what the conservatives are starting to do is figure out how to make it cool, because for so long it was boring, and oh man, they weren't really seizing the opportunity of masculinity and femininity and making it cool. But I feel like social media, TikTok, they have these like sourdough baking wars and et cetera, et cetera. I think that we are starting to grasp we have to get into the social media space. Like President Trump started they had a TikTok during his campaign, which I thought was, and he really defended TikTok and with a great controversy, but he stepped into what's important to young voters. It's TikTok. And he had a great team around him. And I think Barron Trump was instrumental in that, his youngest son, to really show this is you can't detach from the young voter. You can seize that opportunity if you make it cool. So that's one perspective.
You don't know how much you're firing me up, because the hill that I'm willing to die on is the nuclear family. And I think that gender roles are of paramount importance to that. And we have let the left, as you said, sort of strip society of masculinity and along with it femininity. However, I don't think the right has caught up to the fight yet and provided enough, I should say, proper examples of what a man is supposed to be. If anybody can go to my Instagram and see my very strong opinions on the role of masculinity in society, and this toxic masculinity movement has been hijacked by people who, unfortunately, in my opinion, are associating themselves with the right, and they are not the models that we need for men in society. We need more Charlie Kirks. Charlie Kirk combines two important things: conviction and courage. A lot of people have courage. A lot of people have conviction. Not many are willing to walk onto a college campus and take on, 1,000 people in person and put their views on the line. And he's willing to do that. And he's capturing an audience, 18 to 22-year-olds, at a point where they're entering into adulthood. They're leaving their homes. They're starting to form their own opinions outside of the ones they were raised in the home with. And he's doing the Lord's work. He's doing the country's work for us at a place where it's probably needed the most. So I appreciate you bringing that up and bringing Charlie's example up. So let's shift to this. You're a mom of 4. You have stood up in a world that likes to sit down and put your values out there for the public to see, and not only put them out there, but risk your platform to promote them. And that comes with, for lack of a better word, risks. It comes with criticism. And that's on the world stage to see, but you're willing to say, it doesn't matter. These are the values that I'm willing to promote to make our country better. But then you go home to 4 kids and you have to be a mom and you have to do all those things that women are supposed to do. There's no higher calling in the world than being a mom. So talk about the dynamic at play there where you're willing to take those risks with your family at home in the background, but also returning to that home at the end of the day after living such a public life as a fighter in the conservative movement.
Yeah, I love being able to include my kids in what I do. So last night, for instance, I went to a Fox News hit down at the LA bureau, and I bring my daughter with me because I want them to be involved, not separate, but involved and included in my life, my work trips. So I think I start and I lead with, though I do go out and work, as much as I can, I love to include them in it. And as they get older, I can't bring my 4-year-old to do this, but I can bring my 8-year-old to participate in it, right? So I think that is a critical thing that I started to do. I brought them to a turning point. I brought my oldest son to a turning point convention in Michigan. It's one of his favorite memories. He saw President Trump speak. He got to meet Charlie Kirk, got his book signed, etc. So I encourage every parent, to the extent that they're able, to bring their kid to business trip, work trips, and include them so it's not this separate one or the other. And I think Elon has done a fairly good job at demonstrating that you can bring your kid into these places. And I know he's a little bit unique, but it does present the option or challenge the idea that it has to be one or the other. Now, for my kids, the first thing that I think is important is, as living in California, and it really started to happen during the pandemic. You have 2020, I had 3 kids pregnant and then had my 4th in 2020, is that I realized that at this point in our country, that if I was not willing to stand and fight, and I'm telling you, against my family, against my in-laws, against my neighbors, against the grocery store workers, that I had a duty to my kids to stand up and fight for them, to stand up and fight for freedom, that tyranny, soft totalitarianism, that it was at our doorstep. And I think that what I showed my kids is that if you have got to get used to being disliked. So I think one of the silver lining aspects of the pandemic is they saw their mom decide to say, I know what is right, I know what is true, and even when culture is telling me I'm wrong, that I'm going to stand up and stand on my convictions. And you do find the warriors around you that are willing to fight for that. And so we had a church here, Godspeak Church, which is an amazing church. It's actually where Charlie's Kirk is deeply affiliated, and a lot of other big thought leaders. Is they stood open and stayed open and in the middle of the pandemic. And so getting involved in the church and saying, I'm going to fight for this, and culture is going to tell me I'm wrong, my government's going to tell me I'm wrong, but I'm going to continue fighting. And what I continue to do in California, and I'm literally, I've been disinvited from weddings, baby showers, after voting for President Trump, and in 2020 specifically, and in the whole pandemic, is getting used to being unpopular or disliked and still rising above it. And with my 4 kids, there is no greater reason for me to be on that battlefield daily, out in politics daily, out to save California, than for my kids. My kids have to have this. I would love for my kids to have the same opportunities that I had growing up of freedom. And I lived in Beijing for a number of years, and I just saw this incredible juxtaposition from what does it look like to live in a communist, totalitarian, really a dictatorship, to what does it look like to live free and have capitalism and the opportunity to really accelerate in your life and to believe what you want and to live how you want. And so the call is, if you have kids, there is, I think, a duty in all of us, Gates, really an intrinsic duty to say, how can I make this world, even in my local community, my local school, my local city council. How can I make it that much better? What are my gifts and talents to make my neighborhood better, to challenge kind of this trend towards what I was seeing as like totalitarianism, especially in California. So they are the reason I do it. And there's no greater gift than to fight for these precious humans to have freedom and, to get to worship a God to get to worship God and go to a private Christian school, and even in a crazy state like California. So
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to what I'm doing. I see it as the work that I'm doing. I'm trying to make an impact for the world that they're going to come up in. I'm trying to sort of pave that path, playing a very small part in it. My guests are really who do the work, and I'm trying to platform them to sort of demonstrate to the world and the country the change we can make. But I'm also trying to show my kids how to do it. They can watch my shows. They can grow up in this environment and say, well, my dad is out there doing the work. So, I should go out there at a certain age and do the work as well. And, they're in school. It's not popular to be unpopular in school. And so they get to sort of see what people comment on my social media, not the really, really bad stuff, but they see that, what they think I'm doing is cool, but not everybody thinks it's cool. So you're never going to make everyone happy, and you got to stick with truth and fight for that truth. So it's very similar to some of the things you said. So, every guest I've had on this show sort of has a critical inflection point of why they're doing what they're doing. For John Andrazik, the lead singer of Five for Fighting, it was the war in Israel. For Michelle Tafoya, when she was on NBC, it was 9/11. Katie, what was the moment for you when you decided, I'm going to get in the fight, I'm going to do the work now or never?
well, I'm grateful that I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh. So at like the early age of 9, right, I was so excited about politics. I lead with that. I always had this hunger and curiosity. I don't really know why. This challenging personality. I wanted to challenge every system. I wanted to challenge every thought. I wasn't the easiest child to raise by my parents because I liked to challenge the status quo. Only in a way that how can you make it more efficient? How can you make it better? And why doesn't this make sense? So I feel like the Lord really created this part of me to thrive in a state like California and kind of like being the minority. So heavily involved in politics in college. I went to Pepperdine and also Pepperdine Law, president of college Republicans, worked in the Office of Political Affairs as an intern in the White House during George W. Bush's years. And I always had this political drive, right? But then I moved to China for 3 years and put my head down and practiced corporate law. And then I had 4 kids. And I think when you're in the midst of having 4 kids, a lot of it is survival mode. So you're not really looking at challenging a political system while you're up 3 or 4 or 6 times a night with a newborn. But the re-engagement in the political battlefield for me was actually the pandemic, was the 2020, 2021, when the election was stolen from President Trump. And I'm just going to say it was stolen. And when Gavin Newsom in our state was shutting down schools, basically had disallowed families to get together unless you were mass and vaccinated. And having read books like and the essay by Social Needs and like Live Not by Lies, and really looking at a system that I started seeing, we're going to lose our republic. And I don't think it's hyperbole. It's actually not hyperbole to say that our republic was actually at the crux of we are going to continue down the path of totalitarianism, or we're going to fight back for our constitutional republic. And constitutional law in law school was my favorite topic, my very favorite topic to explore and challenge and look at, and to watch the essence of our Constitution get shredded during the pandemic by the hyper left, by the woke left, by the really the I think communist left. I said, if I don't now get involved and fight with every part of me, every cell in my being, for my kids, and really for what is right to preserve our republic, I feel like we all have a duty to fight for our republic as Americans, right? Thomas Jefferson said, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And I have always had this sense of duty. Ronald Reagan, we're going to spend, if we don't fight for our kids, we're going to spend our sunset years telling our kids and our kids' kids what it was like to be in the United States where men were free. Like every generation has a responsibility. And I take that responsibility seriously because having lived in a country where that's in Beijing and in China where that's not the case, you realize how precious and rare liberty is and how precious freedom is. So when the pandemic hit, it was a clear sign to me that I have a very small role to play in a state that's broken, in a country that's broken, to help bring our country back. So I just threw myself into the fight and in every way that I possibly could, Gates.
Well, we all hear about China and have thoughts on China, rightfully so. But, you living in China gave you that perspective, and perspective is something that you've sort of carried your whole life. You followed what we went through in Florida with Amendment 4, with abortion. You've been an advocate, pro-life supporter. You're on the board of the White Rose Resistance. Tell us what that is, and what is this perspective that I'm referring to? Why are these issues so near and dear to your heart?
Yeah. Well, the White Rose Resistance is amazing. It's Seth Gruber started it really looking at the origins, the fundamental origins of abortion. So he took it all the way back to the 1940s, 1930s of Margaret Sanger, and drew these similarities that are. I'm much more of a cerebral person at heart. Really, I need it to make sense here. And what Seth did is he showed through the White Rose Resistance how abortion is one of the biggest forms of racism that you can find. They started putting these abortion clinics in neighborhoods, all Black neighborhoods, to why? And the board members in for the what was called I think the Birth Control League at the time with Margaret Sanger were all KKK members, but they put them in predominantly African American neighborhoods because they were interested in aborting African American babies, right? And so he draws out the whole racist origins from Nazi time all the way until the KKK, and then up into the 1960s where Margaret Sanger started Planned Parenthood. But the reason, Gates, that I am pro-life is because I was approximately 30 minutes away from being aborted. I learned this when I met my biological mom when I was 18. I was then adopted as a newborn, and the story really is one of a miracle. The story was she had gotten a phone call. She has an abortion appointment at 10 a.m. and her aunt is pulled up ready to take her to get an abortion, and she's a 19-year-old single young woman who had kind of been a groupie for the Motley Crue, grew up with a pretty tough background of sexual abuse, and is pregnant now with this baby and doesn't know what to do. And the first phone call she gets as she's leaving is from my biological father, who's like, "Get an abortion. I'll do whatever it takes." And she's then okay, hangs up. Then the next moment, she's almost out the door. The phone rings again, and she walks back, answers the phone, and it's a Christian counselor who says, "Hey, Ruth is her name. I really want you to consider an open adoption rather than an abortion. So you have an opportunity to know who this child could be and give this child an opportunity to live. And I think that you are maybe not understanding how painful abortion is for women, the loss of their baby and the ensuing psychological, physiological trauma. And this is my hope and prayer for you, is that you're going to choose adoption, and an open adoption." So this was in the 1980s, and an open adoption was almost unheard of, that being which the biological parent has contact with the adopted parents. And Ruth, at that time, and I know where I get my rebellious spirit, she's like, goes out to her aunt and says, "I'm not getting an abortion." And of course, to the anger and dismay of her family, she goes forward with the pregnancy and chooses life. And I'm then born and adopted and raised in a family and get to meet her when I'm 18. And the 18 wasn't an arbitrary number. It was just kind of when I was ready to engage with learning about my biological parents. But this is an issue so near and dear to me because of the time frame, the timeline that she looked at. Finds out she's pregnant, immediately wants to go get an abortion, and we're talking seconds of a phone call that really spared my life and saved my life. And so she now is she has a very interesting perspective, my biological mom. She's very much a kind of a heavy feminist, and speaks to women who have had abortions about life, but from a way that they can relate to her, because they really come to her and express their pain from their abortions and the sense of loss that they have. And so being on Seth Gruber's White Rose board is just an extension of my passion to see him be able to kind of cut through the culture war and get right to the heart of, depopulation efforts of abortion, that the racist background of abortion, the abortion pill has the same chemicals that they used in the exterminate camps in Nazi Germany. To stop the progesterone from flowing, and it's cut off the oxygen to the baby, right? These are the same chemicals that were used. And so for me, it's just such a blessing and gift to work on a board and work alongside such a culture warrior that wants to end abortion and preserve unborn babies' lives. So yeah, that's my story.
It's a very powerful story, and Seth is a friend and another man that has courage and conviction and combines the two. The Margaret Sanger stuff and the origins of abortion, people refer to it back then as population control. And what's sad is it's continued to overwhelmingly affect, poor and minority communities more than anything else. I appreciate the work he's done to sort of tell that story and shine a light on something that others haven't had the courage to. The other thing about abortion that doesn't get talked about enough is it's sort of women sort of do it for this freedom. They don't want to carry the burden of having this baby for the rest of their lives. And the worst part about abortion is we lose a life. That's why we call it the pro-life movement. But I've talked to Abby Johnson, who's one of the foremost experts on abortion in this country. She worked at Planned Parenthood. She actually had abortions herself. And she's now come out and exposed all the lies, all the corruption at Planned Parenthood, shined a bright light on it, written a book, and now is one of the most pro-life advocates in the country. And what she'll tell you is that a lot of times you lose two lives because you lose the life of the baby. And with that freedom actually comes a burden. It might be a short-term freedom from that responsibility, but the psychological effects that an abortion has on a woman later on in her life is causing women to commit suicide, turn to alcohol. We call these deaths of despair. And so you actually end up doing significantly more harm than we just think the initial abortion does. So I think these are conversations that people like you need to keep shouting to the mountaintops to tell people your story and say, look what an avoided abortion brought to the country and the world. So I do appreciate you talking more about that and being so open about it. So last question for you, for young conservatives, particularly female, because I think we need more female badass women like you on our side in our fight. You all are tougher than men anyway, so we need more of you to come outnumber us. They're doom strolling on Twitter. They're mad at the world. They want to affect change, but they just don't think they can. You have. What's your advice to them?
I was so eager at this turning point in the 2020-21 time. I had this energy, and I kept feeling this call to not to wait, but to allow things, to put myself out there, but also to take the steps kind of really, I feel like the Lord had prepared for me. And I had this, okay, Lord, okay, every time I'm in church, I'm like, I got to go. I'm going to ask to be on this board. I want to do this. And to be honest, I felt just wait. and the doors will open. And what started happening for me is that the doors did open. A campaign needed me to do door knocking. A newspaper needed me to be on their board that were trying to kind of get information out about the pandemic. And what it is that if, especially when you have kids, the balance can be a very intimidating thing, right? How do I both drive these initiatives forward and tend to the emotional, physical, spiritual needs of my family? And so you want to, I think, do it in these steps where it's like, take these steps as they come to you, and these opportunities make sense for your family and make sense for you to be able to juggle, right? So what I get to do with Rick Grinnell is I get to do fundraising, build relationships, host fundraisers, but I also get to pick up my kids every day from school, which is my favorite thing. I want to hear about their day. I want to be the one that picks them up. So I'm not in this obligatory 8 to 5 where I'm completely boxed out from my kids. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but for my family, I have to pick them up from school because they expect that. And so the culture war has to be fought, and it can't be at the expense of your kids and your family, I think. So what is exciting is that as these opportunities come, look at them, take them as they make sense, and dive in to the extent that you can. And I started saying yes to so many things, but only as they made sense with my kids. Again, can I bring my kid to come to this speech? Can I bring my kid to Fox News? Now, Trace Gallagher, every time I go on Fox down here, he's somewhat upset if I haven't brought my kids because he wants to see them. And so I think it's those gradual steps for moms. It can feel like an all or nothing, but it's taking the steps as your kids become older that make sense for your family, and really figuring out how you can impact change in the community or in the state that you're in, and going for it. So that's my advice, is to engage as it makes sense for your family and your kids.
Well, we're glad you are engaged. I mean, you're a model for all women and men to emulate in this country, and the country's greater for it. All right, Katie. So you're everywhere. I mean, all I have to do is tell my viewers to turn on Fox News, every other night to Trace Gallagher, and there you are. But for people that want to follow you more intimately, where can they find your work?
Katie Zacharia on X or on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn as well. And I just post my news and political opinions, which are usually, trashing Gavin Newsom or the likes.
And now they can find you on We the People. Katie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. And they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Garcia, so that's no excuse.